The Creepy Corner presents If You Don't Reply by Callum Haire. Just promise me you'll reply in 3 days, alright? If you do that, I'll tell you how it works. First off, you need to know that the LetterMan was an actual person, and he wasn't all that scary to start with. More sad. His name was Stanley Mosley. He used to live in that place at the end of our road, the one with the iron gate that's missing a few bars. Kids still wedge themselves in there today. Scream about how they're stuck, how he'll get them if you don't help. It'd be funny if Stanley hadn't been real. The truth about him was as simple as it gets. One Tuesday, old Stanley's wife went out for milk and never came back. Even took the dog. By Thursday, Stanley had shaved his head, tidied his living room, and bought a party-sized bottle of codeine from a pharmacy guy who didn't ask questions. He downed them like candy and threw on an episode of Wheel of Fortune. At the end of the second ad break, he started writing his last words. The drugs kicked in early, and his head slammed on the coffee table before he could finish. Never woke up. I swear those ad breaks are getting longer and longer. I've always wanted to tell a ghost story that would outlive me. Not a campfire tale, nothing you can listen to with marshmallows. Something dark and hairy, with actual teeth. The kind that infects people, twists in their gut. Something about Stanley's last words stuck with me. If he'd made it to the end, what would he have said? Sorry, Jacqueline. Screw you, Linda. Whatever he was writing, whatever rotten thought was leaking out of him, it had potential. It was like a loaded gun he never got to fire. Maybe he was writing it for me. I'll never know for sure. I'd lived on that same street where Stanley died forever. I'd seen him a lot, mooching around in his dirty overcoat. Sometimes I'd catch him on my paper round or in the corner of my eye while I lay on the grass at the front, reading my book. Me and my friend Billy would even goof around at his expense on the weekends. We threw eggs at his windows and rang his doorbell. When we weren't terrorizing, we watched 18-rated slashers Billy's brother bought. Tried to guess who'd survive. Billy never got it right. When Stanley died, it was my paper round that gave me the idea. That's how it started. See, before you went out and grabbed the satchel, before you straddled your rust bucket bike, you had to sort the papers. They came in a polystyrene bag that smelled like gasoline. You'd roll, unroll, re-roll, fasten them with a rubber band. There was plenty of time to add something. And if you were horror movie junkies, like us, you could write something that made the blood run cold. Something messed up, hilarious, real hyena stuff. You could slip your little masterpiece between the headlines and the horoscopes, and make sure it was proper neighborhood reading material. And then go further. All we needed were some instructions. If you're reading this, you've received a copy of Mr. Mosley's final words. He died writing them, and they were left unfinished. Now, he's the LetterMan, and he wants you to finish what he started by adding to his letter and passing it on. When you've added what you want to say, put it in the gray envelope and leave it outside your door. If you don't reply within 3 days, on Halloween night, he'll come to stay. He'll knock 3 times, all dressed in gray, ignore his last words, and he'll take yours away. We thought it was pretty good. It was 40% rhyme, 60% death curse. In Billy's treehouse, we took 30 copies of it and 30 copies of a letter template aping Stanley's dying note. All that said was, Dear Marjorie, I am sorry. I've decided to end it all because... And then the rest was blank. We'd no idea if Stanley's wife was called Marjorie, but it sounded right. Also, it scored double points because it made Billy crack up. How old was she? 100? He snorted. Kool-Aid actually leaked out his nose. From the wooden window, you could just make out the corner of Stanley's house. When we were done stuffing the envelopes, we leaned all the way out and gave it a salute like war heroes. The retriever over at 48 barked once. Maybe it was in on the plan. All that remained was to send them out, and that we did. You might have got one yourself. I slid a bunch of them behind the front page of every issue of that week's paper, and took it to house after house, toss, repeat. At the dead end, Billy would be there, and we'd crack a cola, sit in the weeds, and wonder if any had taken. He'd take my bike back to the office, riding slow, scanning every doorstep along the way for movement. He kept a notebook and wrote down any houses that had returned one. On the first day, there was nothing. Plenty of people didn't read the community paper. And I thought about how our holy transmission had probably ended up in the trash, buried in banana peels. We were the worst writers in the world, just two kids playing Exorcist with cheap stationery. But people had read them. They just needed time. Time to panic, to hear the LetterMan. There was a crack he spoke to them through, a space on the page where his 3 unfinished dots left a silence that built and built until it was all they could think about. And so, on day 3, the replies started. 34 Elm Tree Avenue thought the LetterMan was sorry because Marjorie was, quote, my one and only true love. 68 Nadine Street begged him to stay away, said they had a baby, only 3 months old. And then there were the comedians. There's always one. One guy confessed he was, quote, pining after Marge's much hotter sister, who had double Ds. We gave him a standing ovation in the treehouse. Truth was, people could have written anything they wanted in those letters. Dirty limericks, Nickelback lyrics, your deepest regret or your grocery list. It didn't matter. The only real rule, was that you had to reply. If you ignored the letter, trashed it, forgot it, that's when the LetterMan would come knocking. Billy took all the replies and kept them in a big wooden box in the treehouse. They sat up there, unanswered, for weeks and weeks. Much more than 3 days. He figured the rules didn't apply to him. He made them, after all. He probably thought that meant something, as if you could pull a god out of thin air and not owe it anything. He was 12. What did he know? And anyway, he wasn't the only one. Ask Jody Fuller. Ask her what happened when she didn't reply to her letter. She won't answer you now, but try anyway. See what you get. She moved here last year, the youngest in her year. If our teachers could have had their way, any one of us would have answered the letter for her. They couldn't get enough of her neat, curly handwriting. Those biology essays? Like something out of a science journal. Jody had out-of-town smarts. She came from a school that had its own learning pods, a space-age laboratory where kids blew things up and cut up frogs. She knew chemical equations that could melt your brain through your eyeballs. And she thought she was too smart for all this. City kids always think they know better. They probably do. But I think it's more likely none of us knew the half of it. Jody took the gray envelope and threw it straight in the trash. She had insider knowledge, after all. On one of the many nights I swung round to see her, under the table, off the books, I'd told her everything. The whole game. It made no difference. When Halloween came around, she got a visit from the LetterMan, too. You see, our plan had a part 2. On Halloween night, I took my dad's trench coat off the hook, covered it in soil from the backyard. I took his pale driving gloves, wide-brimmed hat. Then I taped scraps of torn letters to my jacket and drew stitches over my mouth in marker pen. I scrawled a message to Stanley on one of the blank ones. A dumb, shaky, thanks for the idea. It felt right at the time. The plan was for me to fulfill the LetterMan's promise. I'd hit every house Billy had marked. The non-believers, trashers, ones who saw a dead man's letter and shrugged. I'd knock 3 times at their door, ask for any last words, and smile just enough to make them uneasy. Maybe they'd give me some candy. I wouldn't argue with that. But mainly, I'd enjoy wearing Stanley as a mask. I wanted to scare them so much they'd reply to every restaurant slip, every junk mail they got with a "Thank you, kind sir," for the rest of their lives, just in case it mattered. At the time, it felt fair. But that night didn't play fair. Jody's house was the first stop, closest on the way to Billy's. The pumpkins lining her wall had been carved, clean, symmetrical, like everything she touched. But the candles inside had burned out. Their smiles were black, hollowed orange skulls waiting for a light. A pack of kids dressed as ghosts crossed the street to avoid me. I straightened my jacket and slipped into character. Tried to think about Stanley, but I didn't really know him, not the real guy. All I had were the parts we made up. The guilt, the love letters, the whole Marjorie fanfiction. That'd have to do. 6 or 8 steps took me to the front door. I'd stood on this porch before on countless nights, waiting for Jody to open it, maybe give me a smile. Tonight, the windows were dark, curtains almost fully drawn. It was a quiet Friday. I cleared my throat. Then I knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. Silence. I stood there, my line prepped and ready to go. "Any last words?" I'd say, and spring out like a trauma clown with arms wide. But the door didn't open. I turned to leave, kind of annoyed. Then I caught the window again, and something through the gap of the curtain. In the dining room, there was a shape, slouched over the table. Its head was tilted, mouth open, as if it had started to say something and never finished. It could have been asleep, or could have been dead. Could have been answering the letter too late. I told myself it was nothing. I couldn't see it in detail. The real Jody would have moved, blinked. She'd have sat up, rolled her eyes, and asked what the hell I was doing in a costume taped together with dead mail. But even now, I can still see that open mouth, like she was about to recite a chemistry equation I couldn't understand. She had the answer, right there on the tip of her tongue. Weeks later, her parents vanished. They made no goodbyes. They left a "for sale" sign staked in the lawn. At the time, I didn't get close. Jody could have been a pile of clothes, a pile of laundry in the shape of a person. Probably was. But every now and then, late at night, I wonder what really happened to her. I'll never know. I figured I'd swing by Billy's. That was always the plan anyway, to regroup, dump the candy haul on the floor, and pick through it like vultures. We'd laugh about our costumes, about the look on someone's face when they saw the stitched mouth and newspaper guts. I didn't have any sweets yet, but Billy's house was decked out anyway. Paper skeletons twitched in the wind, and some tinny speaker was playing Monster Mash on repeat. Kids were laughing somewhere, far off. Here, everything felt still. I had that feeling you get when you turn up and the party's already over. There's confetti on the floor, but the DJ's down to the deep cuts, and most folks are already on their way home. I knocked, waited, knocked twice again. Nothing. No footsteps or voices. No Billy. Just the skeletons and the music and that sickly orange glow buzzing in my eyes. You could see the treehouse from the gate, barely. It was a shadow in the branches, the same box of wood we'd jumped fences to get to 100 times. I headed over. The ladder was still there, but when I got to the top, I knew something was wrong. The trap door was open. We never left it open. That was rule 1. If it was open, it meant we were inside. If it was open and we weren't, something was wrong. And then I saw a candle burning. Just the one. Its glow caught the underside of the boards. It wasn't flickering the way you'd expect. It was more holding still, like it was concentrating. I didn't go up. I didn't even touch the last rung. I stayed at the top of the ladder and stared. The air felt wrong. It had the dry, dusty smell of a cupboard closed too long. But underneath it, there was something sharper as well. Burnt paper, old nickels. My fingers curled without thinking. Maybe Billy had lit that candle for spooky vibes, like any kid who watches too many horror movies. I could believe that, if the trapdoor wasn't open. But it was. I backed down the ladder like I was edging off a roof, rung by rung. When I hit the ground, I didn't look up. Didn't need to. Maybe he was fine. Maybe he'd be down in the morning, shoveling candy into his mouth and laughing about how long I stared into that damn candle. But I don't think so. I think something up there had already started writing his ending, scribbling out his last words in heat and wax. Whatever it was, hunched behind the paper skeletons, I didn't want to meet it. No, sir. I turned and ran, not because I was fast enough, but because it was the only thing I could do. I could feel something searching for me, thinking of me as it roamed the streets. A tongue was pressed to the gap in its teeth, trying on my name. Gravel bit into my shoes, my trench coat flapped. That cul-de-sac, the one Billy and I used to race through when his mum shouted at us from the front yard, it felt longer now, warped, full of houses watching me run by, all closed up for the night. Maybe they were locked up, locking out the LetterMan. I realized I was almost home. I could smell our dog in the backyard, the sprinkler ticking a countdown. And just as I turned the corner onto Sundorn Road, I saw him. Stanley Mosley. Not the myth, the monster. The real version, or whatever was left of him. His eyes were black, an almost frustrated smile on his washed-out lips. His skin looked vacuum-sealed to his bones, pulled tight across his face like a bedsheet over a kid trying to scare his little sister. Over his forehead was a bruise the color of dying fruit. I guess that's what happens after you slam your head into a coffee table. He was standing in my street, where he'd lived forever. When he saw me, I stopped running. He raised a gaunt hand, veiny with the effort of writing 1,000 letters. He tipped his wide-brimmed hat, respectfully, from one gentleman to another. Under the hat the bruise had spread, dark and rotten. I didn't tip mine back, just stood there, frozen in the middle of the pavement. I didn't know what he'd come to collect, only that it wouldn't be another letter, this time. Across the street he spoke. His voice came muffled through soil, buried somehow. "You're welcome," he said. I didn't move, couldn't. His voice faded, but the words stayed. "You're welcome." For what? I blinked. And as I did, he was already backing away, crouching low. He ducked through the gap in the old gate and folded himself back into the part of the story we never wrote down. As he did so, he continued to watch me until the shadows by his porch took him. I walked the rest of the way home without speaking. The wind had picked up. Leaves rattled in circles on the pavement, scraping past gutters. My coat hung heavy. I kept thinking about the treehouse, about the candles still burning inside. They say Billy stayed up there the whole night. When his dad found him, he was wearing a gray overcoat of his own. His mouth was open, just about to say something funny, only he'd forgotten the punchline. Would never get to it. When I got to my house, there was something sitting there, just behind the welcome mat, a shadow against the steps. I walked closer. It was a pile of Halloween sweets. They were all wrapped, neat. Full bars, too. The good kind. Not the stuff adults give out to feel better about themselves. A real haul. Someone had gone trick-or-treating all night for me, keeping score until I got home. And right at the top of that pile sat a calling card, a gray envelope. Inside was a blank letter. Just the words, "Dear Marjorie, I am sorry. I've decided to end it all because..." And below that, 3 dots. I looked at the sweets, the envelope, the 3 dots. It could have been a gift. Or maybe a dare. Maybe I should have burned it all. The letters, the coat, the pages. Maybe I should have let it die with Billy. But I didn't. Because here's the thing. The LetterMan never finishes his letter. He just passes it on, hands the pen to someone new. You think you're telling a ghost story, but really, you're building a staircase for something to come down. We didn't remember Stanley. We summoned him. So now I've told you how I think it works. I'm not saying it's real. I don't know for sure. All I can say for sure is that it's your turn. You know what you need to do. Finish the sentence. You've got 3 days.
If You Don't Reply was written by Callum Haire and narrated by Rob Knoll. The Creepy Corner is part of the Corner Theater podcast network from Straight to the Point Productions. It is creative directed by Annie McGrath and executive produced by Annie McGrath and Marisa Cooksey. Episodes are mixed and edited by Matt Keim. New unsettling stories will be released every Tuesday and Friday throughout October. In the meantime, stay creepy.